Xi Jinping likes to say that the world or the region is experiencing great changes unseen in a century. I'm not sure about that time frame, since this is a century that includes the Pacific War, the Korean War, U.S. China normalization, the end of the Cold War, and so on. But there's no question that the changes are profound and that they present immense challenges to the four countries represented at the conference. I thought that the Genron survey did a tremendous job of identifying the perceived risks in Northeast Asia and illuminating certain contrasts in threat perception among the four countries. And I know we'll have a chance later to discuss some of the specific security problems, such as Taiwan, North Korea, maritime territorial disputes. The survey also does a good job in highlighting transnational risks, such as extreme weather from climate change, environmental degradation and water shortages, cyber attacks, nuclear proliferation, supply chain vulnerability, macroeconomic risks. It's a long list. But in my view, by far the darkest storm cloud over Northeast Asia today is the security dilemma that the U.S. and China have stumbled into as their relationship decayed from sector-specific competition to full spectrum rivalry. These are now two mutually suspicious and increasingly hostile states. Each country feels it's protecting the status quo and its legitimate rights, but thinks that the other country's behavior is disruptive and unjust. Each state sees its own actions as reactive and defensive, and the other's actions as aggressive and threatening. Each reacts to the other side's military behavior and military capabilities with alarm and believes it has to respond with a show of resolve and superior force as a deterrent. And this syndrome drives the bilateral relationship in a negative spiral as each state's action increases the anxiety of the other. And the actions that each side takes to increase its own security has the effect of pushing the situation closer to a crisis. We've reached a point where just the defense of democracy by the US, the Republic of Korea, and Japan is seen in Beijing as a threat to the security of the Chinese Communist Party, and where the Belt and Road Initiative is seen in Washington and Tokyo and Seoul as a threat to the international rules-based order. But in a healthier environment, wouldn't the focus be on ways that we can reconcile democratic governance principles with one-party systems? Or an effort to identify steps that would help Belt and Road projects produce better outcomes? But the negative dynamic between Washington and Beijing also affects attitudes of the general public, as well as the political elites in both countries. And this is something that's evident in Genron and in other polling. And it's something that we should be very worried about. Because ordinarily, people to people and cultural connections serve to generate a largely positive view of the other country. And that can serve as a safety net when tensions arise between the two sides over a particular issue. But as public attitudes sour, governments have much less room to maneuver, and politics tends to worsen the security dilemma. And the net effect is that public opinion begins to act as an accelerant to tensions instead of acting as a brake. And to me, This security dilemma is the overarching menace threatening the region. And I think that for three reasons. Number one, it's created a hair trigger environment where an incident can quickly escalate into crisis, and where the lack of trust, the lack of dialogue, combined with populist political pressure to defend the motherland, it means that a crisis could very well lead to conflict despite neither side actually intending that or wanting that. Secondly, the security dilemma has radically increased the risk of conflict over Taiwan. In fact, the Taiwan issue that we're going to be talking about is a classic example of the syndrome I described, where each capital thinks it's just responding to what the other has done with legitimate defensive steps, and that it's the other side that is acting in a threatening way. A third reason, a third category of negative outcomes from this security dilemma is that the range of global problems are only going to get worse because China and the West are unable to fully cooperate. So, high on the list are problems like preventing pandemics or dealing with them, or environmental degradation, or global warming. Problems where we're in danger of crossing a tipping point, a point of no return after which we will be unable to avoid a disaster. And I'd add that there's a subset of this category of problems that stem from the inability of China and the three democracies to cooperate. And that's what I'd call lost opportunity costs, okay? So for example, think of the loss to our interests when we make it harder, not easier, for students to attend each other's universities, for scientists to collaborate, for industries to move data freely across borders, and to set common standards for digital systems based on the best possible model, not based on keeping another country's products out. So, Kudo-san, in terms of your framing question about this conference, what roles and issues should be addressed, I happen to think that the greatest value would be to maintain a focus on the U.S. China strategic rivalry, to analyze the security dilemma that I've described, with the American and the Chinese participants doing their very best to listen to the other countries, and the Japanese and the Korean participants to offer their thoughts to us on steps that we can take that might help diffuse U.S.-China tensions and remove obstacles to some of the areas where there should be cooperation that countries in the region would like to see.